Okay, picture this. It's early February, Berlin. We're in the dead of winter.
And not just, chilly.
No, not even close.
Yeah.
We're talking about a weather event so bizarre, so severe, that meteorologists actually gave it a name. They called it an ice cloud.
Which sounds like the title of a disaster movie. Or maybe, like, a sci-fi novel. It doesn't sound real.
It really doesn't. But this was the reality. It's raining, but the air is so cold that the rain is freezing in midair. It's coating the whole city.
Okay.
Every single surface, every road, every windshield in just a sheet of pure ice.
Wow.
And the Berlin airport, which is usually this, hub of German efficiency, is totally paralyzed. Runways are just skating rinks. Flights are diverted, canceled. The city is essentially locked down by the weather.
And normally when you get a weather event like that, the official advice is simple. Stay home.
Right.
Cancel your plans. Make some tea. Don't go out unless you absolutely have to.
Exactly. But on this specific day, February 7th, tens of thousands of people are doing the complete opposite. They are scrambling. They're jumping on any train they can find, renting buses, getting in cars.
Doing whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes to get through that wall of ice and into the city center.
It sounds like an evacuation, but they're not running away from something. They're running toward it.
Right. And that something is what we're going to get into in our deep dive today. We are unpacking the massive February 7th demonstration in Berlin.
Specifically, the rally that was organized by the Iranian resistance. And to guide us through this, we have a really fascinating piece of source material. It's a detailed, on-the-ground interview from Radio Irava with Aziz Paknejad,
Who is a longtime political activist.
He wasn't just watching this on the news. I mean, he was in the thick of it.
So here's our mission. We're going to use this interview to peel back the layers of this whole event. Because on the surface, it's a story about a logistical nightmare and a protest. But underneath all that, it is a story about a really vicious political firestorm.
Oh, it really is. The source material exposes some deep, jagged fractures inside the Iranian diaspora, specifically this conflict between the resistance and the monarchists that is getting, incredibly heated.
It challenges a lot of what you might think the opposition to the Iranian regime actually looks like.
And we also have to talk about the message they were sending to the German parliament, especially about the terror designation of the IRGC.
But before we dive in, we should probably set the stage with our source.
Right, yeah. This is important. The material we're analyzing this interview with Aziz Paknejad, it comes from a very specific perspective. He's speaking for the Iranian resistance, the NCRI, the Ashraf movement. He is a committed activist.
Meaning he definitely has a side in this fight.
He absolutely has a side. So our job here isn't to just nod along and, endorse his politics. Our job is to strip down what he's saying, look at the claims, the anecdotes, the arguments.
And help you understand why this group believes what they believe and what that tells us about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the ice. Because Paknejad's story in this interview, it starts at 5 in the morning on the day of the rally.
Right. He's supposed to fly into Berlin. He wakes up, checks his phone, and gets that notification every traveler dreads. Flight canceled.
And he says he didn't even really believe it at first. He actually goes to the airport anyway.
Which is such a human moment of denial, right? You're just staring at the departure board, hoping it's a glitch. But nope, the airport is completely shut. He finds out this ice cloud has basically just encased the runways.
Now, for most of us, that's the end of the trip. You go home, you call the organizers, you say, hey, act of God, I tried.
But this is where the story really shifts from a travel diary to, a case study in resolve.
Yeah.
He doesn't go home. He figures if the air is blocked, he has to go by ground. He manages to navigate this whole complex web of trains to get to Cologne.
And then an overnight train to Berlin.
Yeah, and this is the part that really struck me. He wasn't alone. He describes getting on these trains and just realizing they are packed.
Packed with Iranians.
Yes. He talks about people hauling huge suitcases, families, older people, all heading to the exact same place. He mentions there were delays, 40 minutes here, an hour and a half there, just sitting on a freezing train.
But he makes a point about the atmosphere, doesn't he? He says people weren't, grumpy or complaining.
No, not at all. He said the mood was determined. There was a shared purpose. And this all connects to a key theme in the interview: discipline and commitment. Apparently, the police in Berlin told the organizers beforehand, look, with this weather, nobody is going to show up.
It's impossible.
Yeah, it's physically impossible. And the organizers replied, you don't know this resistance.
Wow.
They were basically betting on their network's ability to mobilize no matter what. Paknejad describes arriving at the Brandenburg Gate hours early and it was already filling up. But the visual that really drives it home is the video he mentions.
The time lapse, right?
Yes. He talks about watching a video of the march itself. In real time, it was a 2-hour procession. And he said even when you fast-forwarded the video, really sped it up, it still took 4 minutes just to watch the whole crowd pass by.
That is a lot of people to move into a frozen city.
Yeah.
The source keeps mentioning numbers like tens of thousands.
It's a show of force. In any diaspora movement, physical presence is your currency. It tells the world, and it tells the regime back home, we're organized, we can mobilize, and bad weather doesn't stop us.
Okay, so you have this massive crowd. They've battled the ice cloud. They've arrived in Berlin. But once they get there, they're not the only ones on the street. And this brings us to the most volatile part of the source material.
The counter-demonstration.
Right. Paknejad describes seeing another group nearby. These were supporters of Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, the monarchists. Now, you'd think, okay, 2 opposition groups, they both hate the current regime. Maybe they'd reach out to high five. Maybe they combine forces.
Definitely no high fives here. The way the source describes this is, well, it's scathing.
So let's start with the numbers. He claims tens of thousands for the resistance. How many does it say the monarchists had?
He estimates about 12.
12, as in 1 to 12 people.
That's his claim. A tiny handful of people. But, and this is the crucial part, he says they were incredibly loud and strategically placed.
What do you mean, strategically placed?
He argues their whole purpose wasn't to hold a genuine rally. It was to create a media spectacle, to create this visual illusion of a divided opposition for any cameras that were there. You know, if you put 12 really loud people right next to the main stage, the camera shot might make it look like 2 equal sides clashing.
And he described one incident that sounded really tense. It involved a German reporter.
Yes. And this is a very specific, very serious allegation. Paknejad claims there was a reporter there who he believes was linked to monarchist propaganda, who tried to aggressively ambush Mrs. Maryam Ravi.
The leader of the resistance.
Right, while she was getting into her car.
And the question the reporter shouted, it wasn't about the protests in Iran or anything current?
No, not at all. According to the source, the reporter shouted, "What do you think about Saddam Hussein?"
Saddam Hussein. I mean, he's been dead for nearly 2 decades. That feels so random.
Well, Paknejad argues it was anything but random. He sees it as a deliberate provocation. By bringing up Saddam, the reporter is trying to drag up these ancient controversies from the Iran-Iraq War to discredit the resistance. He calls it suspicious and completely irrelevant.
But why go to all that trouble? I mean, if they're also Iranians who want the current regime gone, why attack the resistance?
And this is where we really get to the core, the deep dive. Paknejad isn't just saying the monarchists are, misguided or annoying. He explicitly calls their movement a security project.
A security project, as in run by intelligence agencies.
That is exactly what he's implying. He argues that the current clerical regime is actually influencing or maybe even using the monarchist movement to disrupt the real revolutionaries.
That's a huge claim. Why would the current regime support the son of the guy they overthrew? That seems totally counterintuitive.
It's a classic controlled opposition strategy. The logic, as he lays it out, is this. The regime knows people hate them. They know a revolution is brewing. So if they can prop up a fake opposition, especially one that reminds people of the old dictatorship, it splits the public.
Yeah.
It makes people think, well, if my only choice is going back to the Shah and the secret police, maybe I'll just stay home.
So the argument is that the monarchists are, at best, useful idiots, or at worst, active assets, because they just confuse the narrative.
Precisely. And Paknejad even gives examples of their behavior that he says mirrors the regime. He talks about harassment tactics in Austria.
Right, the shopkeepers.
Yeah, he shares these anecdotes of monarchists going into Iranian restaurants and shops in Europe and basically bullying the owner.
Bullying them how?
Telling them, you have to hang the flag of the monarchy in your window, and if they don't, they threaten them, Maybe your shop catches on fire. Maybe we report you for something.
That just sounds like a shakedown.
Paknejad compares it directly to the tactics of the Basij or even the Savak, the Shah's old secret police. He's saying, look, these people aren't Democrats. They're just another dictatorship waiting to happen.
And speaking of flags, let's talk about the visuals. You can usually tell a lot about a movement by the symbols they fly.
Absolutely. The war of flags is central here. Paknejad points out a really stark contrast at the rally. He says the monarchists were carrying not just the old imperial Iranian flag, but also American and Israeli flags.
Okay. And the resistance?
They were carrying the Iranian flag, the Lion and Sun, but without the crown, and also flags of Ukraine and the Syrian opposition.
Ukraine and Syria, that's a very specific choice. What's the message there?
Well, according to the source, it's about solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
The resistance sees themselves as part of this global struggle against tyranny. Ukrainians fighting Putin, Syrians fighting Assad. They see a kinship. It's a message of, we're fighting for our freedom, just like you are.
And the U.S. and Israeli flags on the other side, how does the source interpret that?
Paknejad is very, very critical of this. He sees it as a sign of reliance. He argues that the monarchists are basically signaling that they're waiting for a foreign savior, waving the flags of powerful nations because they hope for some kind of external intervention.
Maybe even military intervention.
Exactly, to put them in power.
Whereas the resistance is saying, we have to do this ourselves.
Self-reliance versus foreign intervention. That is the core ideological split he's pointing to. Freedom has to be won by Iranians for Iranians. If it's handed to you by a foreign power, it's not real.
This leads perfectly into the slogans. Because there was one chant that seemed to just dominate the rally in Berlin. Death to the oppressor, be it Shah or leader.
Marga sitamgar che shabashe jarar. Yeah, it's become the defining slogan since the uprisings in 2017.
Okay, let's unpack the words robber. That translates to leader. I have to admit, when I first read this, I wondered if they were against leadership in general, which seems a little counterproductive for a revolution.
That's a common confusion, and Paknejad clarifies it. He says, robber here isn't a general term. It refers specifically to the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. It's his official title.
So they're not rejecting leadership, they're rejecting the specific dictator.
Exactly. The chant is really saying, we don't want the current dictator, the sheikh, and we don't want the old dictator, the Shah.
It's the third option.
Precisely. They're rejecting that binary choice. They're saying the future of Iran has to be a democratic republic, not a return to the past.
Well, wait, I've heard other groups use the slogan, all together. Sounds nice, right? All together. Why does the source criticize that so heavily?
This is a really fascinating bit of political theory in the interview. Paknejad calls the all together slogan a trap.
A trap? How is unity a trap?
He argues that all together is just a way to delay the hard questions about what the future government actually looks like. It's saying, hey, let's just get rid of the mullahs first, and then we'll figure out the rest later.
Okay. It's vague on purpose.
And Paknejad says that's exactly what happened in 1979. Everyone united against the Shah, but they never agreed on what came next. And because the Democrats weren't organized, the Khomeini faction just hijacked the entire revolution.
So his argument is, if you don't define your democratic values now, you're just clearing the seat for the next tyrant.
Exactly. Don't just unite against something. Unite for something. Otherwise, you're walking blind into another dictatorship.
Okay, so that's the internal politics. But this rally wasn't just for Iranians. It was in Berlin for a reason. It was aimed right at Western policymakers.
Right. And immediately after the rally, there was a high-level meeting in the Bundestag, the German parliament.
This is Rahavi spoke there. What were the specific demands?
The source highlights three main pillars. First, trigger the snapback mechanism.
That's reimposing the UN sanctions.
Yes. Basically saying the nuclear deal is dead, the regime's behavior hasn't changed, so the sanctions have to go back on. Second, close the regime's embassies, expel their diplomats, isolate them.
And the third one?
The third one is the big one, the terror designation. The resistance wants the EU to officially list the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist organization.
But the West has been so hesitant to do that. I feel like we've been hearing this debate for years.
Extremely hesitant, and Paknejad calls this the appeasement policy. He argues that Western governments know the policy has failed, but they keep hiding behind these legal hurdles. They claim they don't have the legal grounds to list the IRGC.
But the source says the regime itself is terrified of this happening.
Yeah, Paknejad points to the threats coming from Iran's foreign minister. He says the regime is lashing out, threatening Europe. And for Paknejad, that reaction proves that the terror designation is the regime's Achilles heel. It implies that the ice is breaking and the West is slowly, maybe, moving toward a tougher stance.
There was one more point about Western policy that I found really striking. And honestly, it's probably the most controversial point in the whole interview. It was about the right to self-defense.
Yes. This is where the rubber meets the road. Paknejad says the West loves the idea of peaceful protest. You know, it fits their legal frameworks, it feels safe. But he argues that when you are facing a regime that shoots 16-year-olds in the street, Preaching nonviolence is basically telling people to let themselves be killed.
He mentioned resistance units, young people in Iran who are fighting back.
He did. And he says the West needs to recognize their right to fight back. Not just protest with signs, but to defend themselves, even if that means using force against the IRGC.
So he's arguing for the legitimacy of armed resistance.
He is. He argues that under international law, when all peaceful means are exhausted, people have a right to revolt against tyranny.
That's a powerful reframing. He's saying it's not violence, it's resistance.
And that is the core message the source wants to get to the Bundestag. You can't ask people to fight a monster with their hands tied behind their backs.
So let's just recap what we've unpacked. It's been quite a journey, starting with a frozen airport in Berlin.
A logistical nightmare that turned into a massive show of commitment.
We moved to the streets, where we saw a clash not just of protesters, but of ideologies. The resistance versus the monarchists, self-reliance versus foreign intervention.
And we saw the deep, deep suspicion the source has toward the monarchist movement, viewing them as a tool of the regime to distract from the real fight.
We decoded the flags and the slogans, no Shah, no Sheikh, a rejection of the past and the present.
And finally, we looked at the hard demands on the West. Stop appeasing, list the IRGC, and acknowledge that the people of Iran have a right to fight back on their own terms.
It's a lot to take in. It really shifts your perspective when you hear it from someone who was on that overnight train, you know? It takes the headline and it makes it human.
It does. It reminds you that these big geopolitical headlines are made by real people making incredibly difficult choices in freezing weather.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away thinking about?
You know, Paknejad said something that really stuck with me. He suggested that Western governments are using legal excuses to avoid listing the IRGC as terrorists. It makes you wonder, if the geopolitical winds shifted tomorrow, if it suddenly became politically convenient for the West to topple the regime, would those legal hurdles just magically vanish?
And that is a provocative thought. Is the law the real barrier, or is it just a lack of political will?
Exactly. Is international law a rigid framework, or is it just a tool that we pick up and put down whenever it suits us?
Something to chew on. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.